At 8:47 p.m., inside one of the most exclusive restaurants on Manhattan's Upper East Side, four men stopped walking at the same time. They didn't sit. They didn't order. They stood there, boot-scuffed jackets smelling faintly of metal and dust blocking the narrow aisle that led to a corner table draped in white linen. At that table sat Eleanor Vance, billionaire CEO, alone with a glass of mineral water she hadn't touched. Conversation around the room thinned like air before a storm. Elias noticed it before anyone else did. He always did. From behind the bar, dressed in a pressed black vest that hid the scars on his forearms, he watched the men's shoulders. Too tight. Their hands hung low, heavy, like they were still carrying tools. One of them kept shifting his weight heel to toe, a rhythm Elias recognized from places he didn't talk about anymore. This wasn't a protest. This wasn't a scene. This was pressure building. "Sir, can I help you?" the host asked, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. The man in front, mid-40s, thick neck jaw, clenched hard enough to ache, didn't look at him. His eyes stayed on Eleanor. "No," he said. "We're here for her." The room went quiet in that unnatural way, like someone had turned down the volume on the city outside. Forks froze mid-air. A woman near the window whispered, "Oh my God," under her breath. Eleanor slowly set her glass down. She didn't stand. She didn't flinch. She looked up at the four men the way she looked at hostile boards and collapsing markets, cool, measured, unimpressed. "I don't conduct business here," she said. "You're disrupting a private establishment." The man closest to her let out a short laugh. No humor in it. "You disrupted 200 families," he said. "This is just dinner." Elias felt his phone buzz in his pocket. He already knew who it was. He stepped into the service corridor and answered before the second ring. "Hey, kiddo." Daddy Maya said, her voice small but trying to sound brave. "Mrs. Lopez says it might rain tomorrow." "Are you still coming early? I'll be there," Elias said without hesitation. "I promise." There was a pause. "You always say that." He swallowed. "I know. But tonight I mean it." When he hung up, he didn't go back behind the bar. He stayed where he was, eyes locked on the table. One of the men leaned closer to Eleanor now. "You remember me?" he asked. She studied his face, searching memory like a database. "No." "Figures," he said. "Name's Marcus. You laid me off 6 months ago. Friday afternoon. Stock went up Monday." "That decision was legal," Eleanor replied. "And necessary." A chair scraped loudly as someone stood up farther back. A phone came out. Someone else hissed, "Don't record," even as they leaned in to watch. Another man spoke, voice cracking. "My kid's insulin runs $800 a month." You know that Eleanor didn't answer. Her jaw tightened just slightly enough for Elias to notice. The fourth man hadn't said a word. He stood half a step back, eyes darting, breathing shallow. His right hand dipped toward the worn canvas bag slung at his side. Elias moved. He crossed the floor calmly, carrying a tray with 2 untouched plates. His steps measured his face, neutral. A waiter doing his job. A black waiter no one in the room was really seeing. He stopped close enough to hear the man's breath hitch. Sir Elias said evenly, setting the tray down on a nearby stand, "You're blocking the aisle. I'm going to have to ask you to step back." The man snapped his head toward him. "Stay out of this." Elias didn't raise his voice. He didn't touch him. "I can't do that," he said. "Not right now." Eleanor looked at him for the first time. "Is there a problem?" she asked. "Yes," Elias said, eyes still on the man's bag. "And it's about to get worse if we don't slow this down." The room held its breath. Marcus scoffed. "Who are you supposed to be?" Elias met his gaze. Something flickered there. Recognition, maybe. or just the memory of authority? I'm the guy making sure nobody ruins their life tonight, Elias said. Including you. The fourth man's hand slipped inside the bag. Elias moved faster than the room could register. One step, a twist of the wrist pressure in just the right place. The object clattered harmlessly to the floor, a length of sharpened steel, not a knife, not quite a tool anymore. Gasps rippled outward. Elias released the man and stepped back, palms open. Take a breath, he said quietly. All of you. This doesn't end the way you think it does. Security started toward them. Someone shouted for the police. Eleanor stood. Wait, she said sharply. Her voice cut through the noise. She looked at Elias, really looked at him now, the calm, the control, the way the men were listening, despite themselves. What do you suggest? She asked. Elias glanced at the room full of witnesses, the phones, the fear. Somewhere private, he said. Before this becomes something none of us can undo. For a moment no one moved. Then Marcus nodded once. Outside, the city roared on, unaware of how close 4 desperate men, a powerful woman, and an invisible waiter had come to changing everything. They stood in a service corridor that smelled like bleach and old brick, the noise of the dining room reduced to a muffled hum behind a heavy door. The city outside pressed in through a narrow exit at the end of the hall, sirens and horns, threading together into a restless pulse. Elias positioned himself without thinking, back to the wall, clear line of sight to every set of hands. Old instincts. He hated how easily they came back. Eleanor Vance stood opposite the 4 men, her posture straight, her expression controlled. If she was shaken, she didn't show it. Power had trained her well. This doesn't change anything, she said, breaking the silence. What you did back there was reckless. It puts all of you at serious legal risk. Marcus let out a tired breath. Not angry, just exhausted. Funny, he said. That's exactly what you said the day you cut us loose. One of the men laughed sharply. She won't remember that day, he said. It was just a meeting to her. Elias raised a hand, subtle but firm, one at a time. The man looked at him. Mid-50s, gray creeping into his beard, eyes rimmed red. Name's Robert, he said. I worked maintenance for 17 years. Never missed a shift. Then the plant closed. My pension disappeared with it. Eleanor opened her mouth. Elias shook his head once. She stopped. Robert went on. My wife had surgery last year. Insurance ran out. I sold the truck, then the house. You know what it's like telling your grandkids they can't come over anymore because you're living in a 1-bedroom with mold on the walls. No one spoke. Another man stepped forward. Younger, early 30s. His hands shook when he clasped them together. I'm Luis, he said. My son has epilepsy. The meds alone cost more than my rent. When I lost my job, I thought, okay, I'll find something else. But nobody hires a guy with a busted knee and no degree. He looked at Eleanor now, eyes burning. You signed the paperwork. I watched you do it on TV. Eleanor inhaled slowly. Those decisions weren't personal. Luis laughed bitter. That's the problem. They were personal to us. The 4th man still hadn't spoken. He stood slightly apart, jaw tight, gaze fixed on the floor. Elias watched him closely. And you? Elias asked gently. The man hesitated, then looked up. Daniel, he said. I was a foreman. I kept people safe. When the layoffs came, I was told to stay quiet. Told not to warn anyone. I didn't. His voice broke. A week later, a guy fell from scaffolding because they'd cut training. He didn't die, but he'll never work again. Silence settled heavy and thick. Marcus finally stepped forward. I led them, he said. I told them this was the only way she'd listen. Eleanor met his gaze. Threatening violence doesn't make you right. No, Marcus said, but being polite didn't work either. Elias felt the tension crest, ready to snap again. He stepped between them, not as a shield, but as a line. Look at me, he said to Marcus. Marcus did. Their eyes locked, something unspoken passing between them. You don't want this on your conscience, Elias said quietly. Not after everything you've already lost. Marcus frowned. Do I know you? Maybe, Elias said. Different city, different life. He turned to Eleanor. And you, he said, voice still calm, need to hear this without thinking about lawyers. Her lips pressed into a thin line. I'm listening. Elias nodded once. Good. He looked back at the men. None of you are villains, he said, but desperation makes people do things they can't take back. Luis's voice cracked. So what are we supposed to do, starve quietly? No, Elias said. You tell the truth. But you do it without destroying yourselves in the process, Eleanor exhaled. You want solutions, she asked. Or do you want someone to blame? Robert wiped his face with the back of his hand. I want my dignity back. That landed harder than any accusation. Eleanor's shoulders sagged just slightly. I won't pretend I understand your lives, she said. But I do understand systems, and systems can change. Marcus snorted. We've heard that before. Elias stepped in again. Then hear this, he said. She can walk away tonight untouched. You can't. That's the reality. But reality doesn't have to be the end of the conversation. He glanced at Eleanor. If you're serious, prove it. Her eyes met his. For the first time, there was uncertainty there. What do you want? She asked the men. Daniel spoke. Transparency, support, something that lasts longer than a press release. Eleanor nodded slowly. I can't fix everything, she said, but I can start. Footsteps echoed at the end of the corridor. Security, voices, the clock was ticking. Elias felt the weight of it all, the fragile truce, the lives balanced on words and choices. Whatever happens next, he said, decides whether this night destroys you or becomes the reason something finally changes. No one moved. And for the first time since they'd walked in, the four men looked less like attackers and more like people who had simply run out of places to fall. The alley behind the restaurant was narrow and dim, lit by a single flickering bulb that cast long, uneven shadows against the brick walls. The city sounded different back here, less polished, more honest. You could hear people arguing blocks away, a bus exhaling as it pulled off the metallic rattle of a subway grate somewhere underground. Elias stepped out first. Cold air hit his face, sharp and grounding. He placed himself where he could see everyone at once, the four men clustered near a dented service door, Eleanor standing apart, arms folded tight, not defensively, but deliberately. This space stripped titles away. No white tablecloths, no glassware, just people. Marcus broke the silence. You stopped me back there like you'd done it before, he said, eyes narrowed. Like it wasn't your first time pulling someone off a ledge. Elias didn't answer right away. He studied Marcus's face, the lines around his eyes, the tension in his jaw. Then he nodded once. Chicago, he said. A long time ago. Marcus stiffened. SWAT. Elias met his gaze. Yeah, something shifted. Recognition slow and unsettling. You were there, Marcus said quietly. South Side. That warehouse. Elias exhaled through his nose. I was. The others looked between them, confused. Marcus took a step closer. You pulled me out, he said. I froze. You dragged me behind a wall before it blew. Elias's throat tightened. He hadn't expected that memory to survive. You saved my life, Marcus said. Elias shook his head. I did my job. No, Marcus said. You did more than that. Eleanor watched silent. She didn't interrupt. She didn't ask questions. For once, she understood that this moment wasn't hers to control. Elias leaned back against the brick wall. After that night, he said, I went home and told my wife I was done. I told her I couldn't keep betting my life on split-second decisions. His voice stayed steady, but his eyes didn't. A year later, he continued. A device went off during a routine call. Wrong intel, wrong assumptions. She was 2 blocks away. No one spoke. I promised myself I'd never carry a gun again, Elias said. I promised my daughter I'd always come home. Luis swallowed hard. So why step in tonight? Elias looked at him. Because violence doesn't care about promises. And because I've seen what happens when people stop seeing each other as human. Robert shifted his weight. We didn't want to hurt anyone, he said, though his voice lacked conviction. I believe you, Elias said. But belief doesn't undo consequences. Eleanor finally spoke. You think I don't see consequences, she asked. Every decision I make affects thousands. And that's the problem, Elias said, turning to her. You see thousands. They live one life at a time. Her jaw tightened. You think I enjoy cutting people loose? I think you got good at surviving in a system that rewards distance, Elias replied. That doesn't make you evil, but it makes you dangerous. The word hung between them. Marcus laughed bitterly. Hear that, dangerous? Eleanor didn't look away. You came looking for accountability, she said. This is it. I'm standing here. Daniel shook his head. Standing here isn't the same as standing with us. Elias raised a hand. This isn't a trial, he said. It's a reckoning. He turned to Marcus. You know how this ends if you keep pushing. Charges, records. Your kid's growing up with a story that starts with, the night my dad lost everything. Marcus clenched his fists. We already lost everything. No, Elias said firmly. You lost stability. There's a difference. He turned back to Eleanor. And you, he said, can walk away from this and let your lawyers clean it up. Or you can listen long enough to understand why 4 grown men felt invisible enough to do something this desperate. Eleanor hesitated. The silence stretched. Then she exhaled and uncrossed her arms. Talk, she said to the men. All of it. They did. They talked about unpaid medical bills and layoffs announced over video calls, about severance packages that looked generous on paper and evaporated in real life, about the humiliation of standing in unemployment lines after decades of loyalty, about the quiet shame of not being able to fix things for their families. Elias watched Eleanor as she listened. No interruptions, no defensiveness. Just a woman forced to sit with the weight of lives she'd reduced to spreadsheets. When the voices finally ran dry, the alley felt heavier, not lighter. Elias pushed off the wall. This is where I stand, he said. I don't belong to either side anymore. I've worn a badge. I've worn a uniform. Tonight I wore an apron. Marcus studied him. So what are you now? Elias thought of Maya, of promises, of the space between who he had been and who he was trying to be. I'm someone who knows systems don't change unless people inside them decide they have to, he said, and someone who knows rage alone won't get you there. Footsteps echoed from the far end of the alley. Voices. Radios. Elias straightened. This moment, he said quietly, is the last one where this can end without destroying all of you. After that, it belongs to the system again. Eleanor looked at him. And what do you think I should do? Elias met her eyes steady and unyielding. For once, he said, don't think like a CEO. Think like someone who finally sees the faces behind the numbers. The sirens grew louder. And for the first time that night, every person in that alley understood exactly what was at stake. Red and blue lights washed over the mouth of the alley, cutting through the darkness in slow, relentless pulses. The sound arrived a second later, tires crunching to a stop, doors opening, radios crackling with clipped voices that carried authority and consequence. The system had arrived. Two officers stepped in, first hands resting near their belts, eyes scanning faces, hands, distances. They took in the four men, the scattered steel on the ground, Eleanor's tailored coat, Elias, standing squarely between them all like a human boundary. "What's going on here?" one of them asked. Before anyone else could speak, the restaurant manager pushed past, face flushed with panic and indignation. "They threatened a guest," he said quickly. "One of our most important guests. I want them arrested. All of them." Marcus's shoulders sagged. Robert closed his eyes. Luis whispered something under his breath that sounded like a prayer. Elias felt the familiar tightening in his chest, the moment when everything narrowed to procedure and outcomes. He knew exactly how this would go if no one interrupted it. Eleanor took a step forward. "Wait," she said. The manager stared at her. "Ms. Vance, with all due respect," I said, "wait." She repeated, her voice calm but unmistakably firm. The officers paused. One of them recognized her immediately. You could see it in the flicker of his eyes. "These men are not being arrested tonight," Eleanor said. "Not if I have a say." The manager's mouth fell open. "They brought a weapon into my restaurant. They brought desperation," Eleanor replied. "There's a difference." The officer glanced at Elias. "Sir, are you security?" Elias shook his head. "No. Law enforcement, not anymore." The officer studied him for a moment, then nodded slightly as if that answer explained more than it should have. Eleanor turned to the four men. "I won't excuse what you did," she said. "You crossed a line. But I won't pretend I don't know how you got there." Marcus looked up wary. "So what now? You make a call and we disappear." "No," Eleanor said. "I do something harder." She pulled her phone from her coat pocket. Her hands were steady. "I'm authorizing an immediate review of the severance and benefits program tied to the division you were laid off from," she said, speaking as much for the officers as for the men. "Effective tonight." The manager scoffed. "You can't do that here." "I can," Eleanor replied. "And I am." She looked at Elias. "You said proof matters." "It does," he said. She turned her screen toward him, then toward the men. Emails sent. Names CC'd. Language precise and unmistakable. Luis stared at the phone like it might vanish. "This doesn't mean anything if it dies in a boardroom." "It won't," Eleanor said. "Because I'm putting my name on it. And because I'm restructuring how decisions like this are made going forward." Robert shook his head slowly. Why? Eleanor hesitated. The alley waited. "Because tonight," she said finally, "I was reminded that numbers don't bleed. People do." The officers exchanged a look. "We still need statements," one of them said. "Protocol." Elias stepped in. "Of course," he said, "but there's no need for cuffs." The officer considered him, then nodded. "Agreed." The tension eased, but it didn't disappear. It shifted, turned inward. Marcus let out a rough laugh. "So that's it, a promise and we go home." "No," Elias said. "That's the beginning, not the end." Marcus looked at him. "You trust her?" Elias didn't answer right away. He looked at Eleanor. "I trust accountability," he said, "and I trust people who choose it when revenge would be easier." Eleanor met his gaze, something like respect passing between them. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," she said to the men. I'm asking for time to do this right. Daniel spoke up. And if you don't, then you take this public, Eleanor said. Every word, every failure, I won't hide from it. That surprised even Elias. The manager threw up his hands. This is unbelievable. Yes, Eleanor said. It is. Get used to it. One by one, the men nodded. Not in gratitude, in cautious acceptance. As the officers began their reports, Elias stepped aside, the adrenaline finally draining from his system. His phone buzzed again. A text from Maya. Did you make it through your shift? Okay. He stared at the screen for a long moment before typing back, Yeah, I'm on my way. Eleanor approached him, lowering her voice. You didn't have to do any of this. Yes, Elias said quietly. I did. She studied him. You're not just a waiter. No, he agreed. And you're not on their side, she said, nodding toward the men. I'm on the side of outcomes, Elias replied. On the side that leaves fewer people broken. Eleanor considered that. I could use someone like you. Elias looked past her at the men gathering their coats, at the officers finishing up at the thin line between chaos and order that had almost snapped. That kind of power comes with a cost, he said. So does walking away, she replied. The city exhaled as the patrol cars pulled off, lights fading into the night. The alley returned to shadow, quieter now, heavier with what had been decided. Elias watched Eleanor turn back toward the street, a woman who still commanded immense power, but who had chosen for once not to wield it like a weapon. Tonight hadn't ended with arrests or blood or headlines. It had ended with something far rarer. Restraint. And that Elias knew was where real change either began or died. Morning came softly to Central Park, the kind of quiet that only exists for a few minutes before the city remembers itself. The air was cool, the path still damp from an early mist, joggers moving past with earbuds in, carrying their private battles forward at an even pace. Elias sat on a bench near Bethesda Terrace, hands wrapped around a paper cup of coffee he'd barely touched. He wore a suit that didn't quite feel like his, yet tailored, neutral, expensive in a way that suggested intention. Not armor, not a costume. A tool. Across the open space, Eleanor Vance walked toward him unaccompanied. No security detail. No assistants trailing behind with tablets and schedules. Just her moving at an unhurried pace, coat open, hair pulled back. She looked less like a headline this morning, and more like a person who hadn't slept enough. Thank you for coming, she said as she reached him. Elias stood, nodded. I figured this conversation deserved daylight. They sat side by side, facing the park rather than each other. It felt intentional, two people looking at the same world, not across a table. I kept my word, Eleanor said after a moment. The review went through. Emergency assistance for the families, healthcare extensions. It's not perfect, but it's real. I know, Elias said. Marcus called me. She glanced at him. And he doesn't trust it yet, Elias replied. Neither would I. Eleanor accepted that without protest. Some of them never will. That's part of it, Elias said. Change doesn't erase what already happened. She nodded slowly. The board isn't thrilled. I didn't think they would be. They think I'm setting a dangerous precedent. Elias almost smiled. You are? She looked at him, then not offended. Curious. I've spent my entire career being told distance is survival, she said. That if you feel too much, you lose leverage. Last night proved something else. That distance can turn into blindness, Elias said. She exhaled. Exactly. They sat in silence for a moment, watching a father push a stroller past the fountain. Elias's phone buzzed. He checked it, then hesitated before answering. Maya, he said, voice softening immediately. Yeah, I'm in the park. I'll be there soon. He hung up and looked back at Eleanor. She's got a school thing today. Wants me there early. Eleanor smiled faintly. You keep choosing her. I promised I would, Elias said. Every choice I make runs through that filter. She studied him. That's why I want you in this role. Not security, Elias said. No, Eleanor agreed. Oversight, human impact. Someone who asks the questions I don't. And if the answers cost you money, they already do, she said. But ignorance costs more. Elias leaned back, considering. This won't make you popular. I'm not interested in being liked, Eleanor said. I'm interested in being accountable. A jogger stumbled nearby, caught himself, laughed it off. Life moving forward, uneven but persistent. Some people won't be helped by what you're doing, Elias said. Some will fall through the cracks anyway. I know, Eleanor replied. I'm not fixing the world. No, he said. But you're changing how decisions get made inside one powerful corner of it. She looked at him carefully. You don't see yourself as a savior. No, Elias said. I see myself as a guardrail. Eleanor smiled at that. I could have used one years ago. Elias stood straightening his jacket. You still can. They walked a short distance together, then stopped near the steps. Eleanor extended her hand. So she said, Will you do it? Elias thought of the restaurant floor, the alley, the moment where everything could have gone wrong. He thought of the men who would never fully recover what they'd lost, and of the ones who might now avoid losing even more. I will, he said, but I won't be quiet. She shook his hand. I'd be disappointed if you were. As they parted ways, Elias turned toward the subway, blending back into the city. Eleanor stood watching him for a moment longer, then turned in the opposite direction, already mentally bracing for the battles ahead. Somewhere uptown, Marcus sat at a kitchen table with paperwork spread out, still wary, still angry, but no longer invisible. Robert picked up his grandkids for the first time in months. Luis filled a prescription without checking his bank balance first, afraid the number would come back red. Daniel started talking to others about safety standards again, cautiously hopeful. Not everyone was saved. Not every wound closed. And the system, the massive grinding machine that had set all of this in motion, kept moving. But it moved differently now, if only slightly forced, to acknowledge the weight of the people inside it. Later that evening, Elias arrived at Maya's school auditorium, just as the lights dimmed. She spotted him in the crowd and waved her grin bright and unburdened. He waved back, heart full, in a way no promotion or paycheck could match. Eleanor watched the city from her office window that night. Spreadsheets, open faces now attached to the figures. Decisions still waited. Hard ones. Necessary ones. But they no longer felt abstract. Nothing had been magically fixed, but something had shifted. And sometimes Elias knew that was the most honest kind of victory. There was the kind that didn't promise perfection, only responsibility. The kind that asked quietly and persistently what each person would do the next time power and desperation crossed paths. Because the answer to that question was what truly decided what changed and what didn't. The night at the restaurant did not end with handcuffs headlines or a viral clip that burned hot and disappeared the next morning. It ended quietly, like most moments that truly change people do. 4 men walked away without being broken by the system they had already lost faith in. A powerful CEO walked away without pretending she had all the answers. And a waiter, an invisible man to almost everyone in that room, walked away having stood exactly where he needed to stand. Elias Thorne did not save the world that night. He did something harder. He refused to let it break another set of people. He stood between desperation and authority, not because he was stronger, but because he was clearer. He understood something most people learn too late: power without restraint becomes violence, and pain without direction becomes destruction. Elias carried the memory of both. He had worn a badge. He had buried a loved one. He had learned that survival is not the same as victory, and that coming home matters more than being right. Eleanor Vance did not transform into a saint. She remained a CEO, still responsible for hard decisions, still operating inside an unforgiving system. But something fundamental shifted. The faces behind the numbers became impossible to ignore. Distance stopped being a shield and became a liability. Accountability stopped being a threat and became a responsibility she chose to carry. And the four men, Marcus, Robert, Louis, Daniel, were not heroes or villains. They were people pushed to the edge where dignity feels optional and desperation feels logical. Their story reminds us that most breaking points are invisible until they happen in public. That is the truth at the heart of this story. Most conflicts in real life are not between good people and bad people. They are between people who feel unseen and systems that move too fast to notice. And change does not come from humiliation, revenge, or viral outrage. It comes from someone willing to slow the moment down long enough for humanity to catch up. The lesson here is not about wealth or class or power alone. It is about position. Where do you stand when things escalate? Do you add fuel or do you create space? Do you hide behind rules or do you ask who those rules are serving? You don't need a title to make a difference. You don't need authority to show restraint. Sometimes the most important role is simply being the person who refuses to let the moment turn irreversible. In your own life, that might look like listening before reacting. Questioning assumptions. Remembering that the person in front of you is more than their worst moment. It might mean using whatever influence you have at work, in your family, in your community, to make outcomes fairer, not louder. Because the truth is, these systems don't change all at once. They change when individuals decide they won't look away anymore. If this story made you think, reflect, or see the world a little differently, that means we're doing something right. And there are many more stories like this. Stories about dignity, accountability, and quiet courage that deserve to be told. So if you want to support this channel and help us keep creating meaningful, thought-provoking content, take a moment to subscribe. It makes a real difference. Stay with us for the next story, because the next moment that changes everything might look a lot closer to home than you think.